10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 267. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 267 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm excited to bring you our monthly Tune of the Month episode. And this month we're going to be looking at a great tune in 3/4 time, which we don't do very often on the show, Bluesette. And if you remember from last week's episode, it was also the basis for our Lick of the Month episode. So before we jump into the show, just wanted to let you know that you can get a PDF for this episode to follow along with the lesson, play the Etude, and get the maximum benefit out of listening to this episode by signing up for our Patreon. This is a listener-supported podcast. We do not run advertisements on this show. Instead, we leave it up to people like you that tune into the show each and every week to support us and keep the show coming at you. So for a small monthly donation, you can be a supporter of the show and get PDFs for every single episode that we have ever done, all 267 episodes. You can get signed up for that by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners and checking out your options in terms of what donation gets you what every month. Got a shout out to some new people that have signed up this week. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, Annette and Kuba. And I also want to thank Jason for editing their pledge from $3 up to $5 to get to that next tier. And of course, as always, thank you to everybody over there, over 300 patrons that are supporting this show and keeping it coming at you week in and week out in high quality. So again, in order to get signed up, go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and you get instant access to all the materials over there as soon as you are signed up. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So we're going to spend some time analyzing how the chord changes in Bluesette work. And then I've prepared an etude with a lot of the rhythmic concepts that we've been talking about for the past 2 months, but this time in 3/4 time. And I think if you're studying the stuff from last month, what we talked about in normal 4/4 time, if you combine it with the things that we were talking about this month in 3/4 time, I really think you're going to start to develop some rhythmic freedom and a way to approach anything that you are going to be called upon to play on the bandstand. You're going to be able to feel comfortable with a lot of these concepts that we've been discussing. So let's dive right in to the chord progression over Bluesette and talk about what's going on. So if you will remember last week when we talked about the Joe Pass line, we have to remember that he was playing that in a different key than Bluesette is traditionally played in. So we're going to look at Bluesette in the traditional key, which is concert B flat. So just know that the things from last week are not going to perfectly line up with the things from this week because it is in a different key. Now, the cool thing about this tune is it's actually extremely logical. It is a series of descending keys using actually very, very traditional jazz harmony to transition between them. So what we see at the very top, if you have your PDF, is we start in the key of concert B flat. Now what we see in measure 3 is we start a 2-5-1 to the key of G minor. So we have an A half diminished to a D7 flat 9, and then we arrive at our G minor chord in measure 5. Now, we don't stay in the key of G minor really at all. What this does is it kicks off a 3-6-2-5 in the key of E flat major. So the G minor quickly becomes the 3 chord of the E flat major. And then we go to the 6 chord, which is a C7 flat 9. Then we go to the 2 chord, which is an F minor 7, to a B flat 7, which is the 5. And then we arrive at our second major key, which is E flat major. Now, what happens in measure 11 is that E flat major chord turns into an E flat minor 7 chord, which becomes the 2 of the next key that we're going to, which is down a whole step to the key of D flat major. So we've got our E flat major chord where we arrived in that key. We hang on to that for 2 measures. That chord becomes minor, which is signaling it's becoming the 2 chord of D flat major. And then we go to A flat 7, which is the 5 chord in D flat major, and then we arrive in D flat major. Now that same thing happens again where that D flat chord all of a sudden becomes minor and kicks off a 2-5-1 down another whole step into the key of B major. So we have D flat major, it turns minor, 2, 5, now we arrive in the key of B major. Now what we get is kind of a fake out. So after the 2 measures of B major, we get this seemingly 2-5 back into the key of B flat major. And that's gonna want to resolve to B flat major, but instead of that, they kind of fake us out. And instead we do a 3-6-2-5 that brings us back around to the top. And then we're back to the top of the tune in B flat major. So you can see we go through a number of keys here. So we go from the key of B flat major at the beginning, quickly to the key of G minor, but that's kind of not a real key change in my opinion, right? It's leading us to that G minor chord, but that G minor chord actually functions as a 3 chord in our second key, which is E flat major. Then we move down a whole step to the key of D flat major. Then we move down another whole step to the key of B major. And then after that, we start the process of coming back around to the top of the tune in B flat major again. So a really interesting chord progression, very, very melodic, moving down by whole steps like this. And you can see that the transitions between keys are relatively simple. It's stuff that we've studied a lot on this podcast through our series on all these jazz standards. It shouldn't be that hard for you to grasp this chord progression. Okay, now let's talk about the etude that I've prepared for you and talk about some of the rhythmic characteristics of the etude that I want you to focus on. So the first thing is I use a lot of 4/3, and that's something we have talked about in the first 2 episodes of this month, how to start to conceptualize that sound. That is something I use in my playing all the time. I really love that sound of 4 quarter notes over a measure of 3/4, and that happens on several different occasions. So I want you to go through and kind of pick those out. The second thing that I want you to look for is concurrent dotted quarter notes, because we talked about that. What that does in 3/4 is it turns the measure of 3/4 basically into a measure of 2. The dotted quarter note perfectly splits the measure of 3/4 in half. So it's almost like playing 2/3. And the figures of 4 are like playing 4/3. And that can really turn your solos into something super interesting when you're kind of doing that superimposition of a different time signature almost over the top of 3/4. Now, just like I do with all of these etudes, I try to make them as natural as possible, meaning what I basically do is I record myself playing, just improvising over the tune, and then I try to notate that out. So these are my natural inclinations over the tune Bluesette. This is what I would play and how I would approach this in my own improvisation. So what you'll notice is I lean heavily on those 2 things, the 4/3 and the 2/3, the figures of 4 and the dotted quarter notes over a measure of 3/4. So that's just where I'm coming from. If you want to use some of those other rhythmic schemes that we talked about in previous episodes, go for it. But this is just an example of how I use that stuff in real life and how I feel studying some of these exercises has turned me into a more flexible rhythmic musician. All right, let's check out what the etude sounds like. So you can hear some of those rhythmic values that we've been talking about all month displayed in the Etude, and hopefully that will give you something to work off of and come up with some of your own ideas and figure out what it is that you like when you're playing over the top of something in 3/4, such as Bluesette. So let me know if you have any questions. You can always get in touch with me on the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can email me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. I'd be happy to help you out with anything you're wondering about. Remember, you can grab all the materials, including the PDFs in concert, B-flat, E-flat, and bass clef by going over to our Patreon site. $3 patrons will get the PDFs, $5 patrons will get the PDFs, plus a demonstration recording, plus a backing track for this particular tune. And you can find that by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners. Get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to all of those materials. All right, we're going to close out the episode by playing the Etude one more time and then doing a little bit of improvisation over the top of this tune. Hope you're all doing well out there, staying safe and healthy, and we'll see you next month with some brand new episodes. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.